Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Welcome Home Podcast powered by H6 Homes. My name is Eric Nieles. I'm joined with my business partner, friend, and co-host, Alex Vasquez.
What's going on, Eric? How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I'm great. Ready for another episode. Talk some business, have some fun.
Can you believe it's November?
I know, it's crazy, right?
It's crazy. We're going to hit Thanksgiving and then Christmas and then it's 2020.
Insane.
It's nuts. Things are going too fast.
Time is flying by.
Yeah, but the reality is, don't we say this every month? I mean, when 2020 comes, we're going to say, can't you believe it's 2020? Then when it's February, we're going to say, can you believe it's February?
I know, yeah.
It's every month.
It's already March.
Yeah. It is true. When you were a kid, they'd say, wait till you get older. Time goes by faster. Doesn't it feel that way?
That is true. Yeah, I remember. I always wanted to be older, and then I would hear everybody say, don't worry, you're going to be old enough soon. And then now I'm like, older, and now I don't want to be older.
You don't want to be older. So let's get into today's show. I'm excited. I think we have some great content that we're going to share today. We're going to open up with market myths, okay?
Yep.
And so here's what I got for you, all right? Is it true that when a seller is selling their home, and you're sitting down consulting with them, and you guys figure out a market value and a price to list that home that's competitive and fair with the market, is it true that a seller should overprice their home a tad in preparation for buyers, lowers offers, and negotiation?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I believe, well, first what I do is when we sit down and go over market and conditions and competition in the community and recent solds and the whole analysis, we come up with a price or a range of price, right? And I always let them know if it's a range, if you're at the bottom of the range, this is what you can expect. If you're at the top of the range, this is what you can expect. If you want to go over that, I always advise against that because it can backfire on you. And what I mean by backfiring is if you price your home with the intent or the thought that I want to price it $10,000 higher than what it is because I know the buyer's going to come in and undercut me $10,000 right away, so I'll be right back where you're telling me I should be. Well, what that causes is probably lower traffic, right? Less traffic through the home. And then what ends up happening is we chase the market back to where we should have been, 2-3 months ago, a month ago, whatever the case may be. And so I always advise against that because it doesn't work. Most of the time it doesn't work, especially if there's a lot of competition in your community. People are going to notice what you're doing. And then you're going to end up sitting on the market for longer than you need to be sitting, if your goal is truly to sell quickly, right? Let me ask you, because I've been told I don't ask enough questions sometimes, so I'm going to ask you a question.
All right, I'm ready. As
the buyer specialist, when you're going to go show your buyer a home in a specific community and you see there's 5 listings in there and you already know the range, don't you, where that house should be. If it's listed $15,000 higher, what do you tell your buyer?
It's overpriced.
Why? How do you know? You haven't seen it.
Well, okay, so hold on. Let me take one step back. First off, I do believe, coming from the buy side, that it will depend on the price category. Let's take $250,000, $225,000 under, something like that. Competitive market, tons of buyers out there, not that many homes on the market, and a house is priced right. You're not going to get as many buyers wanting to submit $15,000, $20,000 below list, right?
Correct.
Because they're aware of how competitive. Now, that's a different conversation if we're in the million plus category, in a sector of the market that doesn't traditionally move as quickly as the other one that I just mentioned. And typically, there might be strategies and tactics in that price category that is used, which might engage a buyer and seller to negotiate some bigger numbers. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree.
Fantastic. So to answer your question, if we see that it's 15,000 over, another piece that we didn't discuss that comes into play is the pricing categories that we're shopping at, right? So if I have a buyer that's pre-approved up to 225, we are looking in blocks and chunks on the MLS, Zillow, and things like that. If you overprice the house in preparation for negotiation and you don't even come up in our searches, it's going to be an issue.
Right. And I always advise the seller that. So when I sit down with the seller, I tell them that. I say, look, buyer's agents search for properties in bulks of numbers. I don't think I've ever heard a buyer's agent search for a property at 218.5, right? They're gonna search between 2 and 225, or 2 and 250, those kind of blocks.
Sure.
And so sometimes it's strategic, right, to price your property at 220 or 225 versus 224,900, right? And so these are the things that we have conversations about. But to go back to your question, the original question of raising the price because I know the buyer is going to bring me down via negotiation, if you're in the right price point, you'll get more traffic, which should cause higher offers versus more discounted offers. And then it comes back on my part to negotiate for my seller the right way. So that's the way I look at it. I don't like overpricing property just to combat the negotiation. I should negotiate for my client.
Sure.
And I should price it properly so that we get more offers, more realistic and reasonable offers that are gonna help the deal close.
So, being on several appointments with you and myself also working with sellers, the better scenario, like you were discussing, would be to drive up the price rather than drive it down. And if it's priced correctly and hits the market right, combined with great marketing, the activity and traffic could be so enhanced that you might be in a multiple offer scenario, therefore getting over list and driving more dollars to the bottom line for your seller. Would you agree?
I want to be careful when we talk about that, because a lot of sellers' dreams are to have multiple offer, right? And it goes back to a couple of things, I believe. Competition in the community,
Sure.
How much activity is going on, and condition of the home, and the way that you price the property. So the only time that I feel, and price point, sorry about that, price point. I think that it's not a great strategy to try and do multiple offer situation if you're in a community and your price point is above a certain price point where there's not a lot of buyers, because then the buyers are too far and few between.
Okay.
If you're at 225 in today's market, all day long. If it shows well, great location, absolutely, you can drive it up that way and use that strategy. If you're in a community, 500,000 to 800,000, that strategy most likely won't work because that market right now is not as busy.
Yeah.
So it's my answer to that.
Last thing on this market myth topic, would the strategy change if we weren't so low in inventory and have such a high demand from the buyer pool? If we were in a more leveled off market between buyers and sellers, would you have to employ a tactic such as a slight pad in price to prepare?
No, I wouldn't.
Okay.
I wouldn't at all.
You still shoot for a great price,
Yes.
price it correctly
Yeah.
right from the back.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, let me also add this to that, because it's so hard to answer a question definitively right here as we're talking, right? Because every seller has a specific goal,
Sure.
right? And if the seller has a goal of reaching X because they have to purchase another home in another state where the market may be different, then we may have to take that into account. If the seller doesn't have to move out of their home until the summer of 2020, then we've got some time to kind of play and
Sure.
try a few different strategies. If the seller has to be out of their home this Christmas, which is 60 days away roughly, right?
Yep.
Maybe we don't do that strategy. Maybe we price it at a lower end of the range, draw traffic in, get great buyer's agents like yourself to show the property to their clients, and at that time see if we can drive the price up from the bottom of the range.
Sure.
So let me ask you this. When you, because it kind of plays along with what your buyer's goals are, right? If you have a buyer that's got 8 months before they really have to make a decision, do you show them properties that the seller may be not as willing to negotiate? Or do you look for keywords in the MLS that say motivated seller, seller ready to move, incentives being offered? Do you do that if you have a buyer that has 8 months to look, or do you search for those keywords if you have a buyer that's ready to move now?
It's a good question, and the answer is no. I search for properties that meet the buyer's needs based on their criteria, condition, price point, location, etc. And then I look for not necessarily keywords, but to your point, indicators. Days on market are super high, right? 2 to 3 price drops that have occurred. Maybe I investigate a little to learn what the seller's motives are. They've got a job reload, things like that. That could come into play. But despite the time that they have to search for a home, I'm really searching for houses that meet their prime needs and demands. Because I rarely get the buyer who says, I have 8 months to buy a house and I want to buy a home 70 cents on the dollar, right?
Mm-hmm.
An investor client might approach me with those needs, and that's a whole different topic and conversation of how we address them. But for the primary home buyer, that's not really where we're going, right? Because there's emotion involved, so condition-wise, location, school zone, etc. And then there's logic, where nobody wants to overpay for a house.
Correct.
Right? So it's a combination of that, in my opinion.
Absolutely. You said something when you just answered that question that kind of brings us back to the original question of this topic we've got today. You said you, as a buyer's specialist, look at if there have been price drops, right? Days on market.
Yep.
So if we go back to the original question, the myth of overpricing because I know the buyer's going to negotiate. Well, I don't know how many sellers and people out there really know the amount of information that's readily available to everyone,
Sure.
every buyer. And so if we price the property at $350, let's just use that number, and we realize it was overpriced because we were trying this tactic of trying to have a buffer for the negotiating of the buyer. Now I realize I'm 40 days in, I've got to reduce because now it's getting closer to the time I've got to move, and we reduce it 15,000 or 10,000. Now we're chasing. Market shifted a little bit, we're getting closer to the end of the year, now we've got to reduce again. And so people don't know that you have all the access to that information. You see every time that I've dropped it, you see how long it's been sitting on the market.
Correct.
And those are indicators to you and your buyer that, well, maybe the seller is ready to make a deal. And so that's what happens, in my opinion.
It's true. Well, it's perfect. And it's a perfect segue to today's topic discussion, which is, let's take what we just discussed and let's visualize that you sat with the seller. They've agreed on a market price that you're going to bring the home to market and list at, right? And then it's a Friday, and by Sunday evening you have 4 offers on the table. You speak with your seller and you present these multiple offer options, or let's just say an at-list offer, right? And now they look at you as if there was a mistake made and they should have priced higher because they see how fast the home got so much attention, contracts, etc. What happens then?
Well, what happens is you've done your job, right?
Right.
You've done your job at bringing 4 offers to the table, and so now the seller is in a great position because maybe now we can multiple offer and drive the price a little bit higher, or we choose the best offer that the seller's been presented out of the 4. The seller has less holding costs because now he's actually going to be able to sell in a reasonable time. We've probably going to, let me stop and I'll continue this answer, but most of the time people don't know, or sellers don't realize, that the first offer or two or three are the best offers they're gonna see.
Right.
Most of the time.
Right.
Because it's fresh on the market, people know that it's fresh on the market, and if it's a great property and it's matched with its condition and price, people are gonna be driven to make an offer. So, I'll continue to answer the question by stating, we've done our job, and now it's time to choose the best offer and hope that someone drives the price up. Now, what I will say is, if I get the question, which I've rarely gotten, wow, I think I made a mistake, we should have priced it $10,000 higher. I don't think I've gotten that question much that I can remember. But at that point, I'll let them know, listen, what caused us to get the 4 offers is the fact that we were priced properly, and every agent knows it.
Right.
And so that's why they brought their buyer.
Yeah.
If we would have priced it out of the market, we may have gotten one, we may have gotten none. And so that's what I let them know.
Have you had the scenario where that all occurs and the seller now has confidence, and there's only 3 days have gone by, they say to you, well, if this is the result of 3 days, Alex, let's wait another week and a half, 2 weeks. What happens then?
Yeah, that actually happened. I can specifically remember twice. And so they didn't accept any offer of the 4 or however many offers we had on the table. And then the house sat.
Oh man,
The house sat. And
that hurts.
yeah, because then what happens is they realize you were right. And now there's no way to go back.
Sure.
And if you do go back, you won't get as good an offer as you had.
You're coming from a weak position.
Correct.
Yes, correct.
And so that's happened a couple of times. It doesn't happen often, but that's what could happen. It backfires a lot of the times. Listen, back in the day when there was no, internet that didn't host all of these homes, where everything was strictly MLS, it was a different world, right? But now everybody has access to tons of information.
True.
They do their own research. They kind of know what it's worth even before they see it. And they've looked at tax records. They've looked at estimates online of what they believe the property should be. And so I really don't think that overpricing a home is an effective strategy. I don't. Would you go anywhere and buy anything that was overpriced?
No, as an educated consumer with so much access to information nowadays in the palm of my hand, no.
Right. And you, as a respectable, reputable buyer's representative, would you advise your client to overpay for a property just because it looked good, or just because the seller felt that it was worth X?
So the answer is no. However, there's a slight caveat to that.
Go ahead.
Right? And this is a good point to make. On the buy side, in such a competitive market, with a home that hits the market and the buyers love it, and the seller is in an advantageous position because there's low inventory and they're driving the market, there are some times when tactics have to be employed in order to get control of that house. And one of the tactics used is allowing the appraisal to go to work for you. Case in point, home hits the market, it's got multiple offers, it's priced at $250, let's just call it. Other comps in the community are at the $235 to $240 range, and we don't feel that the extra $10,000-15,000 is justified. However, we know that there's a tremendous amount of traffic and the seller is accepting an offer in a day or two, right? What do? Well, we come from a very weak position. If we come in $10,000 under ask, we're probably not going to get the house. We come from a weak position competitively if we ask for closing costs, right? Because the seller has options. So sometimes we will have the discussion with the buyer, depending on their level of interest, what they like, and disclaiming up front how we feel. We do think it's overpriced. However, if they love it enough and like it enough, we could potentially submit an offer that's competitive. And if we get it and they're using financing, we know that they will be required to get an appraisal done on the property. And an appraisal is supposed to be quote unquote, is supposed to be an unbiased opinion of value from a state licensed individual. Would you agree?
I agree.
So sometimes, again, just to add some context to that question, where that's an instance where someone might be willing to offer above what the home is worth, contingent upon an appraisal that comes in that either validates that we were right and it was overpriced and now we have to go back to the seller and try to bring it down, or that the appraisal comes in on par with what we offered, and that might make them feel a little bit more secure in moving forward in the transaction.
Good. Yeah, that's all great points. One thing you said in there was the only time that you would feel that that was okay was that if there was very little inventory or competition in the community.
Correct.
Right? Which would probably justify the reason why that agent felt comfortable listing a little bit higher than probably what it was worth.
Sure.
And so that's a good point. Let me ask you this now that you brought it up, and I know it's kind of around what you were talking about. When you find yourself in that position, do you advise the client, because there are certain deadlines in the contract that have to be met, do you advise the client to hold off on inspections until this appraisal comes back, or do you let it ride?
Yeah, it's a great point. We, a lot of times, will structure appraisal first before inspection. And the reason why, for the audience listening, is we already have validated that our opinion is the home is overpriced. But we've come to a conclusion that we're willing to employ this tactic in order to get the house, right? And so in an attempt to limit the risk and the overspending a buyer might have, why, if we're questioning the value, would we have the buyer do inspections first, which is going to run them $400 to $500+, only to get to the appraisal? Now we're 2.5, 3 weeks into the transaction. The appraisal's another $500 or so, so they're into this for $1,000, only to get an appraisal that shows up confirming it's less than what we agreed upon and potentially losing the whole deal.
Right.
We'd rather flip it and figure out first up front if we're validated on price, if the appraisal hits where we need to, and if it doesn't and we do have to walk away from the transaction, I'd much rather expose my buyer to losing $500 than $1,000.
Correct.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I asked.
Yeah, good stuff.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah, all great things and great points that we discussed. Some takeaways just for the audience. So we don't recommend overpricing properties.
No, not
We'd
at all.
rather price them correctly right from the start, drive tremendous activity via great marketing, great write-up, and all the things we employ when working with sellers, right? And not subscribing to that myth of essentially a huge pad, if you will, to prepare for what buyers might do in terms of negotiation. Would you agree?
I agree.
Yeah, fantastic.
Totally.
Another takeaway, and I would say the most important one of today's show, is the great compliments you were giving me as a phenomenal buyer's agent, and you're asking me. I mean, it's just a new man. It's a new show.
Yeah, it is. I wanted to make adjustments. I've always been told make adjustments.
Make
you know,
adjustments, yeah. You're listening.
You continue to grow by making
There
adjustments.
you go. I can't wait to see where we go on episode 10.
Wow,
We'll see
imagine
what happens. you know.
taking over. Though. You won't talk at all.
Anyway, where can they find you, Alex, if they have questions?
Well, you can email me, alexvaz, VAZ001 @gmail.com. Text, call, 321-443-3483. They can find us on the internet at h6homes.com.
Yeah, we are Instagram, H6Homes. You can find us also under our individual names, Eric Nieles and Alex Vasquez. And you guys can call me anytime, 407-383-2189. And I look forward to hearing from everyone. Thank you so much for listening to another episode. Thank you for you, man. I appreciate your time, and it's a pleasure to talk real estate.
Absolutely, man. Thank you, and thank everyone out there for listening.
Awesome. Thanks.